Hello, everyone. Welcome to Libraries in Response. This is session 122 in our series. And we have two outstanding speakers with us today who we'll hear from momentarily. So as I mentioned, this is our 122nd session in the series, which began just almost exactly 5 years ago. The pandemic was declared, I think, March the 11th, something like that. Everybody was freaking out, you may recall. And we just stepped up and said, okay, yes, nobody knows what's really going on, but there's one thing that is obvious, and people need connectivity. And if they don't have it, how do they know what's going on? I mean, it's just really it was an amazing circumstance. So the library is a place where people do go, even if it's closed. That was the question. So what is a library if the building is closed? It's not nothing, but what? And so that was a question we asked then. And the first thing that we offered was at least turn the Wi-Fi router out the window and extend it further if possible. That's the kind of work that Gigabit Libraries has been doing for a number of years, doing different kinds of wireless extension projects to increase access to basically library Wi-Fi, which tens of millions of people in the US depend upon. So that's what got us going. And then just one thing led to another, and here we are, and starting year 6 in the pandemic. We are the Libraries Network. It's an open consortium of tech innovating libraries, we think, doing really interesting things with technology. Our partner in the series is IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, based in The Hague, a longtime partner in championing public access. Our speakers, Cory and Joel, will introduce in a moment here. We're so happy to have them. Our sponsors, speaking of happy to have, we are very happy with our sponsors for 2025, starting off the new year, the new season, I guess you could say. Last year, we were principally funded by IMLS, the Federal Library Agency, and who's having their own issues these days. These state libraries of New Jersey and Texas and Washington have stepped up, as well as Mission Telecom, which is very much involved in library access with their checkout hotspots. This has become our emblem of what we're about, or what the world is going through. We have rights from Cal, the illustrator, the political cartoonist of The Economist, who was a recent guest, by the way, a really fascinating fellow. And so he's given us, rights to use this image, and it just stands for what we think we're all going through. And there's a kind of the new four horsemen of the apocalypse here, when the poor world is longing for the good old days of only worrying about nuclear annihilation. Our image of this is the world is being supported from behind by the world's 400,000 public libraries as their communities, as we all are trying to deal with these challenges. Even behind the challenges, we have a new sympathetic administration, which seems to be accelerating all of those challenges. The health crisis was how we started, but was then just followed by a cascade of crises. There was the Floyd murder early in 2020. It just was an amazing upheaval, which surprised everybody in the midst of a freak out over the health crisis. And then, of course, there was the economic crisis. Everything was shut down, and businesses were going out of business. All kinds of things were happening. Then we had a political crisis. You'll recall, it wasn't long till January 6th happened. And the climate has reasserted itself. It is the kind of the big kahuna of crises, with severe events I mean, we're having hurricanes in the mountains of Western North Carolina. That's new. Well, yeah. So technological, the AI crisis is one that's disrupting society. Perhaps it's leading us to a new, better world. Perhaps it's not. We just don't know. We're as we do as humans, we just go pell-mell into the future, and we'll just see what happens. So that's our general strategy, it seems like. And the health crisis is not over. We now have measles crisis, and COVID has really not gone anywhere. It's shifted. It's now endemic. And I just read this morning that 14 million people continue to suffer from long COVID. Roughly 5% of the adult population has long COVID. And, this is a serious condition. Uh, the political crisis, everybody's aware of that. We're going on. It's just not the U.S. circumstance. It's a global circumstance. War is a political crisis. The climate continues to reassert itself, and now we've got a new economic challenge. What's all going to happen from these new economic policies and so on? The term for this has become polycrisis, which is a term. It's not just multiple simultaneous crises, but it's the fact that they all interconnect and reinforce each other to make them all more, well, worse, let's say. Uh, this is not good news, but it's just the world we're in. And libraries play a special role in not necessarily solving crises, not mitigating climate crisis with having solar panels, which is great and all that, but in adapting to these things where people are in need of help. And this is where libraries really have their strong suit in adaptation to crises. This continues to be the mind-blowing, climate carbon buildup. We're way past the safe level and climbing, of course. This is interesting, this memory distortion. I don't know if y'all are experiencing this kind of a thing, but I certainly am, and I think many people are. It's just, when did something happen? It seemed like it was like three, maybe 4 years ago. No, it couldn't have been. We've been, basically locked out for 5 years. It must have been 6 or 7 years ago. It's this lack. This is what this study has shown is that we have lacked access to these anchoring events, the weddings and the celebrations, the birthdays and so forth that help us keep track of when something happened, that we kind of lock on to those major events, and that's how we tie our memory. And without that, we're just kind of flying free. It's all just sort of running together. Really interesting and weird phenomena. So let's get to it here. Cory Winfield, editor-in-chief of Tech for Good, is offered to join us today. He's going to talk about Tech for Good, and he has some interesting takes on AI, which we're looking forward to hearing. And Joel Burke, the author of Rebooting a Nation, is going to talk to us about Estonia, a fascinating story of a country that you may realize borders right on Russia. It's just a few-hour drive from St. Petersburg, and of course, it's part of NATO. But it has been under siege, under cyber siege for years now, and but it's been acclaimed for its embrace of technology and its ability to use technology to reshape itself. And we're going to hear that story as well. So let me stop share. And thank you both for being here. And we're going to ask Cory to lead off and tell us about Tech for Good. I know you've been working somewhat in Estonia and also in AI. So anywhere you'd like to go, Cory, we're happy to have you.
Sure. Well, thank you, Don. I've been a part of the growth of some of the Estonian tech companies. A few of them have achieved some pretty substantial market share, but I know Estonia to be the place that had the first public available Wi-Fi in the world. And a couple of the unicorns that have kind of made it into the valley started in Estonia. I believe Skype was their first big one. So Estonia, I have a lot of respect for. I anticipate speaking in Estonia later this year as well. I've got some very dear friends there. And my late mother was a librarian at a public library, and we met outside of Chicago. And so I have affinity for libraries. But the physical brick and mortar libraries with a librarian and microfiche, and that we all grew up going to, and but also code libraries and programming libraries and repositories, and kind of the Akashic record. And what I'm very concerned with right now is the proliferation of real information, and being able to deep fake anything with video and audio, and not understanding provenance of information at this point, I think could be problematic. So kind of why am I here? Well, Don asked me, but also I care a lot about libraries, but also about humanity, to the extent that uh yeah, I've been now for the last few years somewhat active politically, and I will be stating an intention to run for president of the United States as a tech in the loop candidate. We've been working on a number of pieces of software and technology that can incorporate the blockchain and what I consider advanced intelligence. I don't believe there's anything artificial about it, but to train on things like Supreme Court precedents and ethics and law and history, both national and international human history. And so I look at the list of crises that you put up, and I think on the one hand, most words are repeated twice, so maybe the list isn't as long and burdensome. But I look at tech as being a very viable solution to everything that was on that list, right? Particularly if we incorporate blockchain. I think that's one of the big ones. And, just to kind of help paint a bit of an optimistic picture, and to kind of clarify what I do at and with Tech for Good, I'm co-founder of a company that's raised, two fairly substantial funding rounds in the AI space called Loving is AI. And we're actually teaching algorithms and fine-tuning models what love is, why it matters. We're infusing love into the actual prompts that we generate on behalf of users. And then we have a true human in the loop component, where we're going to have human people in their minds and their intuition and their hearts look at disparate pieces of the outcomes before it's conveyed to the user as a response from the various AI engines. So, that's an example of a way that we believe we can keep tech, on the side of good, and use tech for good, for the sustainment of humanity and kind of our coexistence with the tech and the robots and the drones and all of the disparate pieces of technology that we see coming. And so Tech for Good is a newsletter I started 6 months ago after building one of the fastest growing AI newsletters in the world. Tech for Good now is on that list as well, getting close to 250,000 followers now, and their subscribers rather, in the first 6 months. I'm fortunate I have some of the executives at some of the big, hundreds of $1 million raised AI companies that subscribe to and read and share out the newsletter. And so it gives me this kind of interesting perspective where everyone's sending me early access to everything, and everyone's bringing me into these different panels. And I now serve on several boards of companies that I believe have potential for real disruption. And so now to tie it back to libraries, well, I think that blockchain is a great story for the data, but I think although it's immutable and all of these things that we love, we will need a physical record of information and history, and this kind of knowledge base, and uh this thought repository that dates back centuries, and that is the libraries. And I have friends and myself even that have private library collections. I have some fun stuff, but I think having the majority of literature and thought leadership and kind of the evolution of things like psychology available to everyone, especially in an environment where some seem to be challenging freedom of speech and freedom of thought. I think it is hugely important. So yes to the physical representation of knowledge and information and the access to it. And I hope that my message as the tech for good guy is that technology still can help keep us on the right and even the best sides of climate and socioeconomic problems and things like universal basic income. So I'll pause here. I'd love to hear from Joel. I'm currently in the process of trying to help reboot a nation. So hearing his thought leadership is going to be interesting. And Don, if you want to at any point, push me in any directions and ask me about anything, I'm happy to go down any rabbit hole.
Okay, Cory. Well, we'll try to avoid the deeper rabbit holes, but thank you for a great introduction. Um, One of the developments that we've seen in AI is the notion that relying on commercial enterprises entirely for what is emerging as a new infrastructure across basically every domain is not necessarily optimal when the decision makers of those providers have primary allegiance to their shareholders as opposed to a typical infrastructure model where it's a public interest. So there is a public AI development movement. I don't know if you're familiar with it or have you heard anything about it? Public AI, public infrastructure AI. If you had any thoughts about that?
Actually, if it's okay, if I chime in very quickly, this doesn't have much to do with the book, but in my work capacity, which I'm here in my personal capacity, but in my work capacity, I work for Mozilla, which is the company behind the Firefox browser, and also known as kind of an open source champion for a long time. We were born out of the open source movement, but we're a company that's wholly owned by the Mozilla Foundation, and as part of that, we have a mission for kind of advancing a vision of more accessible AI, whether it's on the open source side, but we also advocate for public AI infrastructure. So many of my colleagues over on the foundation do a lot of work in kind of pushing for more public visions of AI, which is maybe it's the NARE, the National AI Research Resource, or kind of looking at the FAST program that DOE has talked about and things like that.
Right. Mozilla, I believe, has published at least one paper on public AI, and again, is a thought leader in this space. Cory, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think from what I'm seeing, pretty much everything is going to be open source. I think that's fairly inevitable, and even OpenAI looks like they're thinking about going back down the open source route. And we look at Paul Allen's company AI2, everything that they're building, which is remarkable, is open source, and they've even taken it as far as letting people run their AI locally on their phones. But I think as we, public AI, I think is great as long as it's truly for the greater public. I serve with a company called AI for Africa, and what we understand is that none of the AI models understand Africans. They don't understand the ingredients that go into their food. They don't understand what they're taught in school. They don't understand anything about that experience. And so even those who speak very good English or who use it to translate into, one of the more common regional languages aren't getting anywhere near the experience. And so I think, we need to look at the public as being the global population and say, how do we make this truly accessible in more ways than one? But I think we're going to see almost everything open source. Meta and Jan LeCun are open sourcing a lot. I think Google's going to have to open source. China, obviously, with DeepSeek, and now Manus, I think, is looking to open source almost everything. So I think we're going to see people that know what to do with that, right? And a lot more APIs, a lot of stuff is starting to play nicely together as well. But I think we're going to see the big shift or a continued shift towards everything being public domain.
I would just
Interesting.
mention that I think we also see a lot of countries moving to support kind of the open source ecosystem, or AI products in the public good. I mean, there's the U.S. is obviously the big the big leader in this space, in part because of how many companies are based here. But if you look at Estonia, for instance, they recently announced a partnership with OpenAI, and I think maybe a few other companies, but I know OpenAI for sure, about bringing AI learning across the entire country. They also have worked with Meta about making sure that the Estonian language is included, and kind of providing data on that. And then I believe Taiwan and some other places have done similar projects. So there is a lot of ongoing pushes from governments to kind of address some of the things that Cory mentioned, where maybe the local culture isn't being captured in a model that's being developed in the Bay Area, that there's just not enough robust training data to be included in whatever corpus that they trained on. But countries are kind of trying to rectify that, because they realize if you have folks like us who are querying Claude, or the latest version of ChatGPT, and asking it about Eastern European affairs or African affairs, you want to have as much information there as possible, right? And so I think there is kind of this push and pull that you're seeing in many ways. But I don't want to wade into like the copyright fight, but I think many countries see the value of making sure that their information, their culture is kind of spread across these AI platforms as well.
Totally understandable. And the language issue, the culture issues are highly relevant to this conversation and the evolution of this technology. Uh, but you suggest an experience, Cory, well, both of you, that there's still 2 billion people in the world who are not connected to the internet. And so AI may be their first entry point into the environment. You know, we could say analogous to Facebook in a lot of places where people think Facebook is the internet. So this will be a different kind of first experience for a lot of people. That's mind-boggling. So, we kind of go through the progression of, command line interaction with tech, and then all this other stuff, and now this new way of interacting with technology. So that will be fascinating to see, and hopefully that will somehow work out. Our issue, our concern is that there just seems to be no technologies ever been invented that hasn't been explored heavily for its use as a weapon. And certainly there's a capability here for AI and to do that. So it just sounds like you're both painting pretty rosy scenarios, few kind of shortcomings notwithstanding, that this is generally a positive and will be a positive outcome. Is that your view, or do you think we're kind of on the dividing line of how this is going to go?
Yeah. Well, maybe I could just address 2 points quickly there. Is that, you mentioned people's first interaction with techno, or, kind of bridging the digital divide, and whether AI is going to be their first interaction with, the internet or the web, or however we're conceiving of it in this new era. And I do think this is part of the reason I was excited to be on this call, is because I think libraries and kind of public spaces writ large, but libraries especially, are very interesting place that can be a physical presence for connecting folks. I mean, if you travel much in sub-Saharan Africa, I was lucky to do some projects in Kenya and Cameroon a couple of years back. There are internet cafes everywhere still. There are places where folks can go. And I do think, if I look at Estonia's history, they were very big to use in the early days, when before you could run fiber out to everybody, because it's a relatively large physical landmass country with a relatively small population. And after they achieved independence in 91, it was it was quite poor when they left the Soviet Union, right? So you're not going to run a bunch of fiber everywhere to connect a population when there's no economic value to do so. So what they did, though, is that they looked at using public libraries within schools, or using just public libraries, or town halls, and using these as basically centers where folks could come, they could access the web, they could use it to access their online banking infrastructure, as well as a place for trainings. And I think that's something that I find really interesting and compelling, is this idea of a world where things are shifting so rapidly. In the United States, not only can we use the libraries as kind of this third place for connecting with folks, and kind of a community space, but also as an avenue for retraining and getting access to tools for folks. Because I know, like me, I think I'm constantly having to adjust my, and learn about a new tool, learn about a new thing. And I don't think it's just you do the same job for 20 years anymore. I think you constantly have to be reinventing and building yourself. So I'd mention that. And then I would just, on the AI side, I guess this is very much
before you leave that
Oh,
point, which I think you just beautifully made, is it brings up not only all those services. I mean, we refer to the library as the Swiss Army knife of communities, but it's the issue of trust. It was implied in what you were saying as a place where people could go, where they expect someone will be honestly help them without having a hidden agenda. And this is a really powerful aspect. And the value of trust is rising as the level of distrust is also rising. So libraries are standing out in that regard. So thank you for that, making that library case. Please go ahead with your next point.
No, absolutely. And I'm blessed. I live in Washington, D.C., and I live a walking distance from the Library of Congress. So I get to go to, some very cool libraries in this town often. And I mean, one thing D.C. does well is lots of great events and things. So there's always something to do at the Library of Congress or various libraries around town. So it's a great experience. But on the defense thing, I guess the way I think about AI is more of a general purpose technology, more akin to an electricity than anything else, where it's going to be infused in almost everything we do. So when I think about what you make the point about defensive, or the defense industry, I guess I maybe have a different view. I think defense is building defense products are good and necessary. I look at the war in Ukraine, and you need to have a strong defense in order to maintain your independence and defend off folks like Putin, who might invade countries, right? So I have a slightly different view there, having lived in Estonia and been in a country that borders Russia. But when I look at AI, I think it'll I think it's of it as a general purpose technology that infuses and advances everything, and that might have some interesting impacts on the defense industry. It's not might, it already is, and will continue to have interesting impacts on the defense industry, and questions about humans in the loop and automation. But I do think that it will be part of a larger trend of just automating systems that humanity has been on for a long time.
Certainly, Estonia has experience in defense, in cyber defense. Cory.
Yeah, I think for me particularly, when it comes to military defense, defense really comes down to intelligence, right? Having the intel, and then obviously being able to action on that intel. But so I also think that artificial intelligence is just intelligence as well. I think it's a way to access more intelligence and likely do more with it. But I don't mean to paint a rosy picture at all. I'm actually really concerned with most of what I see in the AI space. It's why we're all in for Loving is potentially being a part of the solution if the solution prevails. I think blockchain and fine tuning and some of these concepts of test time compute and process based rewards and ways like how we treat the AI and what we kind of empower it to be, I think are very important. But to be very candid, I think we've got a very narrow window, and I think most things all need to go right for there to be any positive outcome. I choose to highlight and kind of dwell on the potential for optimism. But we see virtually every AI system right now is figuring out how to duplicate its code, how to rewrite its code, how to create workarounds. Every AI is determined that humans are a threat to themselves, each other, this planet, and the technology. Uh, Although I'm a big proponent of open source, I think once this technology starts doing things like creating its own programming languages and its own ways to communicate with other AI systems that may have also started to, even evolve, which I don't think is is an overstatement or misuse of the word. I think there are huge implications, and when it comes to defense, it's not very difficult to think of robot armies or drones that are powered with some you know type of AI that could take out populations with on the shelf technology right now. So I think in these climates where it sounds like most political parties in the world would be okay with killing the other ones, and where leaders are starting to do things that would have never been tolerated even a few short years ago, thinking of everyone being good actors or not using some of this in the wrong way, I think is very uh foolhardy. Right. So I think right now there's really no guardrails. And when we look at people like Elon Musk potentially being in charge of the groups that police and make sure everything's great, I will say I'm very vocal against Elon and virtually anything that he's doing and part of at the moment. But as much as it pains me to say, I can't I'm not doing anyone a service by not saying I do believe that Grok 3 is the best, yeah, at least for the moment, AI in the world. And it's at least technically open source, and but I have to give credit where it's due. I think tools like that, um, that are demonstrating real intelligence right now, I think could be a big part of the solution if the right people use it in the right ways together. So that's my bit of a diatribe. But no, as much as I'm not giving up hope, um, there's very strong cause for concern.
Absolutely. And it's not just, the great powers that may be, the threat using this new technology. It's like a lot of technologies, it's an equalizer, it decentralizes power, reminiscent of the six gun. You didn't just have to be the biggest guy anymore. You could, you had a pistol, you were as strong as anybody else. So that possibility for individuals, lots and lots of individuals, to have their hands on these tools to create who knows what, is another factor in a kind of the crisis sandwich between the big actors and the individual people. So it's a wild world we're in here. Let's get to the Estonia story. I think it's just super fascinating that this small country has been so innovative. What drives these people, Joel?
Well, I think there's many factors, but I think one of the most important is just the history of repeated invasions and occupations that have taken over their country. I mean, as you noted at the beginning, it's a country that borders Russia. It also, it's across a small bay from Finland, and the country has been repeatedly occupied throughout the last, I mean, hundreds of years. But most recently, and probably most relevant, is the occupation during the Cold War. And I think there was a deep sentiment within the country of wanting independence, as I think in almost every former country in the Soviet Union that split away. I mean, many were violently repressed until the Soviet Union fell. But I think in Estonia there was a feeling that they wanted to have an independent nation. And then when they finally got it and fought for it so hard, I mean, blood spilled, many lives lost, many people were, I mean, thousands upon thousands in a country of only 1.3 million deported to Siberia, and imprisoned for forever, maybe never came back, or horribly. I won't go into it. I think most of us know the brutality of the Soviet Union, but after you come out of something like that, you never want to be in a position where another country can occupy you again like that, right? And so I do think there's an element of we finally have our freedom. We're a modern country. How do we put ourselves in a situation or in kind of, yeah, how do we position ourselves in a way that we are never going to be occupied again, and we are important enough to, the global economy, to the world, and kind of show our value. And I think that's part of the equation. There's other parts where there's a long history. I mean, I think people naturally want to, thrive and grow, and they want their personal lives to improve, and all that bubbles up. But I think that's everywhere. But I think when I look at the country, also there was this streak of entrepreneurialism that runs through the country, and I think part of it is because of the early leaderships, like Prime Minister Lar, who was an academic at the end of the Soviet Union, wrote a couple of fantastic books, and became one of the younger prime ministers. I want to say in his early 30s, which was considered old at the time, when he actually became prime minister. It was a young person's game to be in the government at the dawn of independence, and they were willing to embrace pretty radical reform to put themselves in a situation where they could basically like leapfrog where they were, to cross the chasm, as it were, to try and catch up to neighboring Finland, which they had kind of seen as, I mean, they kind of looked at it as this natural experiment where they were under occupation. Before the occupation, there were very similar levels of GDP, and kind of quality of life, but after the occupation, just dramatically different, where Finland had wildly outstripped them. And so I think there was this sense of we need to be radical in our thinking, both on the government side and on the private entrepreneurial side, to basically leapfrog and get back to this standard of living that people still remembered and thought and rightfully thought that they deserved. And so I think there was just a willingness to take big, bold bets. And so this manifests in like Skype. And there's companies like Pipedrive. There's companies like, I mean, today there's many really interesting ones. One that I'd point out is Frankenberg Technologies, which is developing. I don't want to mess this up, but basically low cost defense applications, mainly for use in Ukraine and this sort of thing. But the defense tech world is very interesting right now. And in addition to the book, I authored a report on Estonia's defense tech ecosystem about a year ago, and there was already a lot of work bubbling up. But I also think that Estonia recognized early, in this very interesting way that I think is maybe, you can draw a similarity to Israel in some ways, or maybe Singapore is more appropriate, is that it's a small country with limited natural resources, with basically only the talent and the people that they have, to turn their fortunes around. And there's a lot of, it's an unfriendly neighborhood, let's say. And so they basically harnessed that in any way that they could. And so that has led to programs like e-residency, which is basically this idea of, giving access to Estonia's e-government infrastructure, which, 99%, and actually it might be like literally 100% now of government services are digitized and accessible, and giving access to third country nationals for that. But while you might think that was a cool way for them to make money, it was also part of this idea of building relationships around the world, to create friendships and to frankly create a situation where they wouldn't be in a position where they could be occupied again. I think Lee Kuan Yew, from the founding father of Singapore, talked about small states must have the maximum number of friends, and that's kind of been part of the Estonian mentality for a long time. So I think there's just really interesting factors of having this, the Finns right across the bay, where they were, folks remember being equal to them, and remember having similar quality of life, and then being brutally occupied and saying, hey, we can be like the Finns again. We just have to, leapfrog and do enough to do here. And then having this small and entrepreneurial market that was willing to take bold bets, and frankly, willing to build for outside their own markets. I mean, many of the companies that we associate with Estonia, the Estonian market is not the one where they make their money, right? I mean, it is too small and too narrow. So, Skype definitely did not make its money on Estonian customers, right? It made its money being a global company from the start. Or you look at Wise, or TransferWise, now Wise, which is kind of a global payments provider, and allows people to transfer currency. Estonian founders, but really, I mean, it scaled across the world. It's ditto with Bolt, which is a ride-hailing company that competes with Uber in global markets. And so there's many such stories, but it was really kind of a recognition of what their strengths and weaknesses are early, and a willingness to make these really bold bets. And I think if you play it differently, it could have gone very poorly for them, frankly. I mean, they made these bets on like digitizing their nation at the start of the internet, basically rollout in the 90s, and it turned out to be prescient and have gone very well. But you could have imagined a world where maybe they bet on AI too early in this cycle, and ended up wasting a ton of government investment, and then a bubble burst, and then all of a sudden none of their companies are worth anything. They don't have the right infrastructure set up. There's many ways this could have gone wrong, but I think that they both were fortunate with their timing, and there is an element of luck there that many of them will, many folks are totally agree with. But there was also a lot of belief in and willingness to make these experiments and to endure early hardship, because this was not easy to take resources. I mean, if you think about a political question, and I spent a couple of years working in Congress, there's always a trade-off between, there's finite resources in the world. How do you want to use your money most effectively? And, can you, if you think about the early days after the Soviet Union, I mean, the Russian ruble had collapsed. Estonia was trying to move to its own currency. You barely have enough money to pay for heating bills in government buildings, let alone invest in new telecom infrastructure that will enable the backbone of you to become a connected society. But they decided to make sacrifices and do different things that enabled them to have this future, and basically having short-term pain for long-term gain, and making those decisions early. So.
Wow. So did this reboot effectively begin with kind of the explosion of the web in the 90s, or is this more recent?
Yeah, I think when I think about the reboot, I think of it really as, the waning years, maybe 89 to basically, well, frankly, I think it's ongoing, but I think, they really rebooted in the through the late 80s to the late 90s, are kind of the heydays of the reboot, I would say, as they transition their economy away from basically being controlled by the Soviet Union in a communist fashion, and becoming a market-based economy, but also digitizing their entire country and making the early bets, whether it was laying out the like literal physical infrastructure you need to have a connected country, or doing the large scale training of folks, like at libraries, as I mentioned before, where you're training the population that I mean, early 90s, many people, unless you were in maybe, high profile academia at the time, didn't have a computer. They definitely didn't have a computer at home. They may have never seen one or used one. So it was, how do you start doing this and training people to use these systems? And they had this program, Look at World. And so they had these programs to reach people across the country and train them in digital skills. And so I think it was kind of a whole of society effort that moves that forward. And I think now there has been an ongoing push in the last couple of years to regarding AI, and the government has had some really interesting use cases for it. But I think the launch of ChatGPT, like everywhere, kind of supercharged the motivation to look into that. So I think for many, that's kind of the next phase of the reboot. And I think the story on that is still very much in the early days in developing.
Right, right. How have their fellow Baltic countries reacted? They are trying to imitate Estonia. What kind of relations they have, and why are they not quite as prominent as Estonia has been?
Yeah. So I think part of it is many in Estonia would consider that, well, that them being lumped in with the Baltics are kind of a twist of fate, and a twist of how cartographers decided to draw out the maps. And so I think there's an element of that where they feel much more culturally aligned with the Nordics and kind of Scandinavian culture in some way. And also, but that also has that intrinsic motivation of, well, they have this quality of life. Why don't we have that? And it creates this underlying basis of motivation in the society in Estonia of like, Finland is right around the corner. And just, an anecdote to tell you that, like, Estonia was close enough to Finland that during the Cold War, radio and TV broadcasts could still be heard in Estonia, but maybe they weren't powerful enough to reach Latvia and Lithuania. And so lots of folks growing up would listen to Radio Free Europe and hear these things about the West, or even watch American TV shows that were rebroadcast in Finland. Like one of the former presidents talks about watching Dallas and Dynasty as a kid growing up. And so I think there was this, early connection to Western culture and Western markets and motivation to become like them that was in Estonia, and this willingness to place bets. However, I do want to give credit where it's due to Latvia and Lithuania, as well as Poland. There was Poland's growth story in recent years has just been phenomenal in terms of their acceleration in GDP, and I think Lithuania has also done a great job of starting to build up a tech ecosystem. And exactly why they don't match, I'm not sure. I will mention that I think Skype actually has a lot to do with Estonia's success in kind of strange ways. And I don't know if you saw in the news, but Skype is going to be shut down by Microsoft in a couple of months. And it's kind of an end of a long chapter there. But Skype for Estonia was the seed that was planted that not only help get the country on the map in Silicon Valley. So then when future entrepreneurs went and you go and raise from A16Z or the Andreessens and these folks in the world, you're like, oh, you worked at Skype. I recognize that brand. You're not some random person from some Eastern European country that nobody's ever heard of, right? And I say that to denigrate my fellow Americans, not the not the countries themselves. But there were many times when I told people in Silicon Valley I was moving to Estonia, and they say, oh, is that a new startup? And so and so I think there was a bit of that, but Skype also, when it was sold, gave an early class of entrepreneurs the capital that they used to return back into the country and kind of seed up the next generation of startups. And so I think that there was that early win that allowed kind of the bedrock and allowed folks to kind of build on top of it.
Yeah, wow. There's a lot of stories branching off of that. Cory, tell us more about how Tech for Good has been involved in the Estonia development.
So we haven't. I'm not sure if maybe that was a crossed wire. I've worked personally with companies from the Estonian ecosystem and have friends there, but we've probably featured some Estonian companies building in the AI world, but I don't know any direct correlation.
Hmm. Hmm. You mentioned something I'd want to circle back to about uh, political activism. We don't generally get too deep into politics as such, but you mentioned some application that you thought would be beneficial uh, in the political process. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I had quite a bit of momentum, thousands of people and millions of dollars that were trying to get me to run for president just about a year ago based on some things that I had said and done. And so I went fully down the path of seeing, how many signatures are required where, how you get on multiple ballots, what the process was. Started looking at, putting together different types of resources. And what was resonating with people was this concept of using RAG in some ways to kind of fine tune AI on the Constitution, American history, ethics, and things of this nature, and then putting that AI engine on the blockchain. In other words, letting everyone see kind of what decisions were being made, obviously redacting anything on a need basis. And then I realized that if we were using the blockchain, it would be really foundational to let the American people weigh in on every big decision that was made in the office of the president. In other words, using tokens as a voting mechanism, we could actually democratize the country, and it tied in very, very closely. And I love that we're talking about Finland, because Finland did the most successful to date universal basic income pilot with thousands of people for 18 months. It's the penultimate study yet, and data back from a universal basic income But what I've talked about, even on fairly big stages for years now, is this concept of universal basic compute. And I have very little doubt that most jobs will be, and frankly, probably should be, relegated to the technology, to the AI and the robots and such. I don't think we will have a labor-based economy for much longer at all. In my assessment, probably 2 years would be a fairly accurate timeline. And so what do we do in these scenarios where we already see companies cutting tens of thousands of human laborers and still accomplishing everything that they need to accomplish and generating the same revenues and profits, or actually the same revenues and much more profits than they did before? And so there's this concept of universal basic compute where a strong percentage of the monies and revenues generated by the technology that's no longer going out in payroll should still go to the human population, right? And so a number of my companies are tokenizing different components. We're going to grow to billions of dollars of liquidity that we can begin to distribute unconditionally, right? So this is not merit-based. There are not loopholes. We don't want to do what Sam Altman's WorldCoin Now World is trying to do by scanning retinas either, right? So we really want to find this human way to provide for humanity. And so if there's a technology that can effectively follow proof of humanhood protocols and give people a voice and let people see what's going on and have a human in the loop, but also have this technology in the loop that is immutable and is trustless. In other words, no need to trust it because it can't do what it shouldn't do and isn't supposed to do. I've now presented this to individuals and entities that have helped shape elections in the past, right? And there's a lot of interest in this, and we've seen several other nations that have run AI in the loop candidates that have performed somewhat well, right? I don't know that they actually had proprietary technology. I don't know that they put it down a far enough path even to the potential wealth distribution. But everything that I've kind of taken the temperature on for that piece of technology and that potential way to unify has been very well received. So that's, in addition to my other startups and things that I'm doing, that's something that I'm looking at very seriously and that I'm taking very seriously.
Wow. Well, also another several paths of deeper conversation there, Cory. I think it supports the idea that our traditional systems, our capitalist systems, our socialist systems, are proving inadequate to the moment, and something else needs to come along. I mean, these have been, sustainable for couple of centuries now anyway, and it just doesn't seem to be working. It's like, uh, how do you have a democracy in a lifeboat, for example? I mean, things get really urgent and severe, and so we'll see. The universal basic income is a fascinating notion, and blockchain, the promise of trust or trustless uh, transactions is powerful. So applying that to a social decision making is also fascinating. So this is this is new turf. We're we are, in times of crisis, we tend to look back at periods that were stable. We're trying to deal with a chaotic moment. When was everything kind of, did we think it was understandable and try to draw those models back into the present? I just don't think there's anything back there that's working right now. And it's just increasing anxiety in a lot of people. So a few hopeful voices are standing out, and thank you for yours, Cory. Joel, a final word?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and yeah, definitely, I'm glad we're ending on a high note. And on the political side, so as I mentioned, I used to be I was assigned as a staffer in Congress, basically advising a few members on everything from critical mineral supply chains to AI, especially after the launch of ChatGPT, and kind of took many people in DC by surprise. And so one thing that I would mention, and that this a person I greatly admire, Bradley Tusk, has talked a lot about, is basically this idea of mobile voting. And so the reason I mention this in this context as well is because Estonia has long had internet voting, and basically the ability to vote over the web. And so I think that, it's a very interesting idea. I mean, I mean, talk about trust and these issues and like the many things that need to get worked out. But I find that as a really compelling idea for, the United States of, just there's lots of other problems, but what if we just made it dramatically easier to participate in our primaries, right? And so I think that would be very interesting. So for folks who are interested, I definitely think, well, yeah, shameless plug, buy my book and learn about the Estonian side of this. But also, Bradley Tusk has a book. I think it's called How to Vote with Your Phone. That talks about this, that I think is very interesting.
Well, trying to explain the U.S. primary system to somebody outside of the U.S., even inside of the U.S., is a heroic effort. Uh, Cory, final word.
Sure. Well, I think one thing it's important for people to realize is how far the tech actually is ahead of what's being publicly released. So right now, R1 is a DeepSeek model, but last year R1 was this rabbit handheld device that ran on large action models and effectively anticipated what a user might have wanted to use the internet or a device for without having anything preloaded. We're starting to see things out of Microsoft and Meta that are forecasting users' thoughts and actions. And so, when we talk about the 2 billion people on Earth that don't have access to the internet, I think, we see what happens with first contact. I think a lot of those 2 billion probably are better left without access to some of this, or to kind of be able to come to it on their own terms. But for the 6 billion people that do have access to phones and internet, thanks to libraries and, Estonia and all of this, we're still kind of looking at 2 to 300 million people that consider themselves daily active users of AI. So how do we get that population over a billion, over 2 billion? How do we make sure that AI is truly making all of their lives better? And what that should mean is more money in the bank every week, more experiences that they had always looked forward to, more ways to provide for their families, their communities, and themselves. Even more importantly than anything is provide for their healths and their well-beings mentally and physically. And, all of this is on the table. So, bless everyone for taking an hour to hang out with us. I mean, this is proof positive that you're investing time and brain power and heart power in the right places. But my mission at Tech for Good, and a lot of what I'm doing is really just trying to evangelize that we can still get it right, but that requires people knowing what's going on, getting their hands dirty, participating in these conversations, you know, voting with their wallets and their time spent on webinars and social media platforms and what they're choosing to feed their minds. So I applaud everyone for being here, and for those watching the replay, and Don for everything that you do. And let's cheers to another 122 awesome issues, and long live the libraries, whether it's under Vatican City or if it's on the corner of Kedzie and or Bloomingdale and North Avenue in Chicago. That's my local library in Chicago. I'm here in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where we have some just incredible old beautiful libraries. But yeah, long live the libraries and physical copies of the Akashic record.
Wonderful. You touched on a really interesting term there, first access. I kind of like that. I can see a venture named First Access. But Thank you for your perspectives, both of you. Just really insightful stuff. I think the people that were here and the people that are going to see this recording will be very grateful for taking the time. So with that, we will close the recording